This is a video in the series of videos that is teaching how to compose units. And in the previous video, we looked at how to create a pattern. And a pattern is used to create units with just a few clicks of the mouse. It automatically generates a script. Patterns can be very complicated. You can use a pattern to create any kind of unit you can imagine. And it allows people to use Flames to create units without ever having to know anything about script. In this whole series of videos, we've been editing the script for units manually, at least specifying the composition manually. In the last few videos, we were showing you how to create units, how to set things up so that your users of the models that you develop or users of scenarios that you develop, different compositions, can create units without having to ever look at script. So even though the script is there, it's not something that you have to look at, and a lot of users will never have to look at it. So in this previous video, we looked at how to create a pattern, and all the patterns that are defined in this scenario are patterns that create just a single unit. In this video, what we're going to do is look at how to create a pattern that can create multiple units. We don't have any patterns like that, again, in this particular scenario, but if you go to the scenarios that are included with the starter content, there will be several patterns there that create multiple units. And this is the place where patterns get particularly powerful. You can not only define a given unit, but you can define units and how they relate to each other. So what we're going to do is we are going to create a pattern that will create these two units all at one time. So it'll create the commander and the subordinate all at once. So right now I have a pattern that creates a commander. I have that. I have a pattern that creates a subordinate. I have that. What I'm going to do now is create another pattern that will create a commander and a subordinate all at once. And place those guys on the map in a single shot. Before I start talking specifically about unit group patterns, I want to talk a little bit more about pattern system parameters. We talked about this in the previous video. There are certain, a pattern can define its own parameters, but there are certain parameters that are defined automatically by Flames, and we call those system parameters. One of those that we used was a parameter called $loc. So $loc is automatically defined to be the value that is specified for the location of the unit when you're creating it. This value that's right here. That is $loc. So whatever the user enters in that field will be available to be substituted whenever you reference the $loc. And there are a couple other system parameters that I want to talk about now before I start talking about the unit group patterns. For this, I'm going to show you an excerpt out of the Flames documentation. And where I'm in the application manuals, the Forge user manual, parameters, patterns, pattern system parameters. So $loc is the one that we already talked about, and you know what it means. When I reference $loc, I can put an X and Y value off of it. Some specific X and Y value. And that X and Y value allows me to specify a position that is offset by this X and Y value in meters from the value of $loc. And so we're going to use that in this little tutorial that I'm about to give you. There's also another parameter called $unit name, and that is the name that is specified when you're creating the unit. So we're going to make use of that one as well. Now, if you want to allow the heading to be specified, you can also use the value of $heading. We're not going to use that today, and you can go in the documentation and read more about this. But I want to tell you about this other form of the $loc and the $unit name, because those are going to show up in the unit group pattern that we're about to create. So we'll go back here now to our patterns window. Whenever you want to create a unit group pattern, you first need to create patterns for the underlying units that are going to get created. So if you want to create two units that are different, you need two different patterns. If you want to create multiple units that are all the same, you can create, you can only need one pattern for that, and you can reference it multiple times. But for each type of unit that's going to get created by a group pattern, you need to make sure you have the pattern. So in my case, in this case, we're going to create a commander and a subordinate. So we have a pattern for the commander, we have a pattern for the subordinate. So we're good to go. So now what we want to do is create a unit group pattern. So we're going to go over here to the class of pattern, and we're going to say unit group pattern. And I'm going to create a new data set so that I have a place to store this, because I can't add patterns to the data set owned by the example user, the Flames example user. And I'm going to leave all that up here that way. And I'm going to call this a blue attack force. That's what I'm going to call it. And I don't have a commander here. I'm going to remove this, because that's just left over from when I changed the class. And I'll leave that description in there, because I can actually, for now, let me just remove it. And I hit accept, and it's going to say I don't have any sub patterns, but that's okay. So now I have this thing called blue attack force. So what I have to do for this is I have to add the sub patterns that I want. So I'm going to add a blue commander, and I'm going to add a blue subordinate. So when this particular pattern is used, it will create two units, one blue commander and one blue subordinate. And so now let's take a look at, and I'm going to move this window up a little bit so you can see it here. When I click on my sub patterns, it shows me the inputs that are defined for that pattern. And remember that system parameter inputs are defined automatically. So every pattern has a $loc and a $unit name. So when I click on this, it shows me those system parameters. And it shows me for this that I've got the name of a commander that is here. And remember that the blue subordinate makes, well, we didn't actually use it. Let me show you when I run the blue subordinate and I type in this, it has a parameter here for commander. And when we defined that blue subordinate manually in an earlier video, you saw that we added the assign commander command. So this pattern has the assign commander command built into it. So it's showing that that input parameter is defined. And it still doesn't like it because I haven't finished it, but I'm just going to say yes, we'll finish it later. I'm just going to go look here at that blue subordinate. See, there's its input parameter. So we need to specify values for all of the input parameters that are required by all of our subpatterns. So I need to specify values for all of these system parameters, and I need to specify values for this pattern-specific parameter called commander. By default, the value that's going to be passed in for $loc is just $loc. And it puts that in automatically. So it puts that using the syntax of a substitution. So it's going to substitute the value of $loc for the $loc parameter. So it's basically whatever value I pass in, I do new unit, and since this parameter guide didn't configure successfully, well, let me make them configure successfully. The reason it doesn't like it is because I haven't specified a value here. So when I hit accept, it's saying the value of subpattern, this guy parameter, that guy may not be empty. So I'm just going to put a value in here right now, just a constant value, and I'm just going to call it Jack. that's not what I want, but I'm gonna specify that for now because I want to come back to this. Now this is a legitimate pattern, group pattern. It configured successfully. So now when I go say new unit, it's going to be there, Blue Attack Force, and it it shows me the inputs that I require. Now, since Jack is a constant, it doesn't make me specify a value for Jack because it's a constant. And in fact, that's not the reason why. It's not going to show me any of these values right here. It's only going to show me the parameters that I have defined for the pattern itself. So since this pattern doesn't have any parameters, there are no parameters up here. And it's going to take whatever value I pass in for the name and the value for the position, and it's going to just pass it straight through. Now, if I actually hit finish here for this particular pattern, I would get an error because I'm going to try to create two units that have exactly the same name. And Flames won't allow that. It'll give me an error because I can't have multiple units with the same name. So I'm not going to finish this. But I'll go back and do some more work on the sub pattern. But this makes the point. Whatever value I pass in for the location is just going to get passed into this guy, and it's going to get passed into this guy. So at this point, both of my units that get created, they're going to have the same location and the same name. So I need to change that. So I want the commander to have the name that I pass in, and I want it to be located at the coordinate that I pass in, but I want the shooter to be offset. So I am going to specify a offset here, and I'm going to do it using the syntax that we just looked at. I'm going to make it be 50 meters in X and 50 meters in Y, offset from the location that gets passed in. And the name is going to be the same as the name of this, but I'm going to say shooter. So, and that's how I'm going to name things. So let's go see. The commander is going to be named exactly what I pass in. It's going to be located exactly where I pass it in. The subordinate is going to be offset, and it's going to be named with a suffix on there of shooter. Let's go try it out. I'll right click here. I'll say new unit. I'll click on Blue Attack Force. I'm going to call this attack. And I have a coordinate there, and I hit finish, and I get two units. So the units are named attack and attack shooter. Now I've got a syntax error because I still have that Jack in there, but let me just show you, there are the two units right there. So there is attack shooter, and there is attack. So I'm not quite done yet because I've got a syntax error. I want to make sure that the patterns I create, the units that I create from patterns always generate script that is syntactically correct. This would be really confusing to a user if I left it this way. So I'm going to remove this guy, and I'm going to remove attack, and I'm going to go back to my patterns window. And for this, the commander, so that the name of this unit is shooter, I want the commander to be the name of the commander, which we know is just $unit name. So I'm going to go over here to my blue shooter and replace Jack with unit name. And hit accept, and we're going to do this again. New unit, Blue Attack Force, we'll call it attack. And we'll hit finish. Get two units, attack and attack shooter. And now the commander for attack shooter is attack. It's the unit named attack. So this is a very simple example of how to use a unit group pattern to create multiple units. But you can see it's actually fairly simple, and it's extremely powerful. So you could create dozens of units from a single pattern. You can have a subpattern can have another subpattern as its subpattern. So you can have nested subpatterns. So you could define a whole set of units. And the nice thing about it is that, as is illustrated by this very simple unit group pattern, the nice thing is that these patterns are defined to work together. The units that get created, from these patterns are defined to work together. So I create the commander and I create the subordinate, and the subordinate is already set up to make sure that the commander unit is already its commander. So that whatever relationships that you have to have set up to make sure these units are all set up to work together are set up in the group pattern, so your end user doesn't have to fool with those details. So this is hopefully will be real helpful to you. You'll understand the group patterns that we use in the starter scenarios. We use quite a few of them, as I've mentioned before. And I hope you'll take advantage of this extremely powerful feature in Flames to make creating scenarios very easy for your end users and give them a lot of flexibility. The one thing I want to mention, this is not related to this topic, but I want to mention this. It is not often that we will create patterns and group patterns that create a lot of subordinates. If we get into the situation where we have to create a lot of subordinates, we will use another technique. We will write cognition models that, when they start, will automatically generate their subordinates. So one of the things you can do in Flames models is you can dynamically create units, and you can create those units to be anything you want. So if you have a complicated force and you have a lot of different things that all have to be set up that a certain way, and you want a little bit more flexibility perhaps than you could get by trying to define all those units in a big set of nested patterns, you can use cognition models and other models to dynamically create units. In the starter models, there's a cognition model called FC Scenario Controller. And that model, we don't really use that very often in all of our starter scenarios. The reason it's there is to give you a whole bunch of example source code for doing advanced things from within Flames. And a couple of the models in there are the methods of that particular cognition model are examples of how to create units dynamically. And you can create them using script, you can create them using a pattern, you can create them using commands. There's a lot of different ways to create units, but if we can build cognition models that use the same source code that's in that example cognition model to create units dynamically. So you can create really big scenarios that way. In fact, an example of that, we used the scenario controller to create a scenario that had 1 million units in it. So rather than sitting here in Forge and trying to right click and create units, that's really friendly way to do it. If you're creating dozens or maybe a couple hundred, you can edit things that way. But if you're going to create millions, you don't want to sit there and edit things manually. So we use the scenario controller to dynamically create large numbers of units. And so with just a few input commands, we created a scenario and we just hit play, and automatically, right when it starts, 1 million units got created. By the way, we were doing that to illustrate that Flames is in fact capable of running very, very large scenarios. And the particular scenario that we created actually ran 3 times faster than real time. Flames is multi-threaded, it's 64-bit natively. It can create huge scenarios and it can run them really fast. Those were relatively simple units, but they were all moving, and we had a lot of sensors in there. They were actually engaging each other and shooting each other. It was very simple. It's kind of on the order of the models that we have here in these tutorial models, but it was 1 million units. And again, we created those things dynamically. So there's lots of flexibility. Flames is extremely powerful. And one of the powerful things is being able to create patterns that can create multiple units in a single execution. So I hope you find this video helpful. Thank you for watching, and thank you for using Flames.